One. Let's get some views on these. I'm being joined on the program by Mr. Johnson, Candid Johnson. He's a senior advocate of Nigeria. He joins us virtually from Lagos. Thank you so much. It's good to see you again, senior advocate. Let me begin by asking you straight up, is the judiciary being taken for granted, or it has just lost its teeth to fight for itself?
Thank you very much. I think that the statement by the Chief Justice in open court was quite remarkable. The judiciary is a political actor, that is obvious, but the action of the judiciary is really subtle. It's intended to be by virtue of the delivery of a product which has authority and which is fundamental to the stability of society. What disturbs me, frankly speaking, is that the Chief Justice would make what amounts to a declaration of war against institutions, against individuals, as he described them, who he says are challenging the independence and authority of the judiciary. That statement has to be made indicates to me that we have fallen into a very, very terrible state in the affairs of our country. And to answer your question in summary, that the judiciary has been rendered weak by a multiplicity of factors, some of which were referred to by the President of the Bar Association, including weakness in judicial appointments, but above all, weakness in the authority that comes to a judge by virtue of his dignity, by virtue of the quality of justice dispensed, the fairness, the accessibility. You see, judicial decision-making is a fundamental to democratic society, indeed to any society. And the authority of a judge comes from the effectiveness of the product that is delivered at the public expense. So that the Chief Justice has to scramble to indicate that the judiciary will hold its own is by itself an admission that it has fallen to a very terrible state.
Then that this is perhaps the lowest that the judiciary has fallen in years that we have experienced in our democratic process.
I think that's fairly put. I think that the incident that the Chief Justice referred to, the attack on the premises of a sitting justice, and the inability of the authorities of states to identify quickly and to take responsibility or impose accountability for what is a dastardly act, an astounding affront on the authority of an independent arm of government, and a terrible signal as to the respect that the government, the executive arm of government, holds the judiciary, and the fact that it does not consider the judiciary to be significant enough in any respect. I think it's difficult to avoid the conclusion that that event was an attempt to intimidate and to give such disrespect as to render the function of the judiciary ineffective. If the executive doesn't need the judiciary for any purpose, even though it's prescribed in the Constitution, they couldn't have made a better statement of that by that act, for which until today we have no accountability. As the Chief Justice said, a magistrate issued an order. He thought he was issuing it on behalf of the Attorney General. The Attorney General has been mumbling a series of inconsistent statements as to what happened and what did not happen. But it's quite clear from the tone of the comment made by the Chief Justice that they don't buy this succession of conflicting explanations and that they recognize that the judiciary is under attack. And the response is not just to declare war, but to ensure that they deliver a product which the public have confidence in. If the public has confidence in the effectiveness, the fairness, the accessibility of the justice delivery system, they will defend the judiciary, and the judiciary can hold up itself behind its dignity. To have to engage into a street fight is a serious loss of dignity, and dignity is the biggest protection of a judge.
To start stating the role of separation or the principle of separation of powers or the role of the judiciary in a democratic process, of course, we know that when the judiciary is being taken for granted, our democratic process might fall on its face like a pack of cards. And perhaps going back to the principles and the concept of separation of powers that the French philosopher Montesquieu and John Locke developed this idea, they've looked at the dangers in why separation of powers need to hold sway. But as it stands right now, would you say that concept, the principle of separation of powers, is in jeopardy, or how would you describe the situation of things?
Well, the first thing to say is that you see the constitutional arrangements on which these principles are founded is a delicate balance of powers amongst a contesting series of powers and stakeholders in any country. When the Constitution prescribes the separation of powers, it is trying to impose checks and balances on the exercise of power by respective arms in order to preserve what is most important, the safety, the security, and the progress of the citizens of that environment. Now, these are so fundamental, and when we have a constitution, it's the conclusion I reach is that we pretend to believe in the rule of law, and we pretend to believe in the efficacy of the Constitution. Anytime an authority of government is questioned according to their behavior, they will refer to the Constitution. People who abhor and undermine the Constitution will say the Constitution provides this and the Constitution provides that. But the honor of the Constitution is in its spirit. It is a delicately balanced social and political contract. If it is not respected and regarded in its entirety, if the spirit of the Constitution is consistently undermined, then the foundations of our consent to be governed is going to break down. Back to Montesquieu and John Locke, who you referred to, the English Lord Acton made an aphorism which is quite famous in the common law. He said that power corrupts and all power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. When one branch of government attempts to seize absolute power and subverts the authority and power of others, it is concentrating power in its hands in a way that makes the entire democratic experiment risky and unstable. And what is going to happen is, as the Chief Justice today is confronting arms of government, other arms of government will recognize that the balance is not being maintained and they must contest for themselves. Ultimately, when these branches start to contest for themselves, the dignity, the authority, the pretense of democratic and constitutional government will fall apart because it becomes a sham. Once the shadow falls apart, then you and I will recognize that we have to be our own government. This collapse of governmental consent and the experiment of political democracy and constitutional democracy is a serious threat to our progress as a nation.
The description is very gory, considering what the impact might be in the nearest future, because this thing develops and it brews a very terrible situation. But to wrap up the conversation around the judiciary and its autonomy, one will wonder that the Order 10 signed by President Buhari is supposed to help give some power, to some teeth to the issue of autonomy. I don't know if that is working, but from your own point of view, how do we get out of this quagmire? How do you strengthen the judiciary?
Well, first of all, in any political contest, political will is something that drives activity. Political will is forced by the polity. An absolute ruler or a ruler who is limited by laws which he chooses to disobey will only be obliged to follow the law or follow the conditions and the rules of a constitutional arrangement if the public, the polity, force that will. So first of all these things that we recognize to be failures, to be threats to our democratic system, if Nigerians recognize that these are dangers to their way of life, to their safety, their security, and their progress, then Nigerians will rise to defend those institutions. If they believe in those institutions, they will defend them. If that is the case, there are many ways to strengthen the judiciary. Now, I gave you that preface because I recognize that unless there is a will, we can make solutions till we're blue in the face. But the autonomy of the judiciary, you refer to the president giving an executive order. And I find that in itself self-serving and dangerous. The idea that the president needs to give an order directing agencies of government to carry out the Constitution is by itself problematic, because every official is sworn to uphold the Constitution, and the Constitution provides for the judiciary to be impartial and independent. But efforts that are being made, denying them of funds, intimidating them by physical force, a variety of measures, which many totalitarian governments take historically, are intended to undermine the constitutional arrangements of the country. And people who do this believe that they can exercise absolute power, that they can govern without consent. The fact of the matter is that history teaches that whether it comes by way of the vote, whether it comes by the way of silence, whether it comes by the way of ignorance or indolence, you cannot govern without the people's will. You can do so for some time by the deployment of violence, by the deployment of deception, and you can protect your power and its corrupt benefits by means of the spirit that you create, but it will fail. And this is what history teaches. This is why I recognize we're in such a dangerous position. If we continue to pretend that we're operating a constitutional democracy without defending it, if we continue to allow powers to be eroded from institutions that are intended to guarantee our safety, our security, and our progress, then we will get to the stage where we have to face ourselves directly, and the entire pretense and the protections of our Constitution will be unavailing. It's a dangerous situation, in my opinion.
Very dangerous indeed, but we most sincerely thank you, Mr. Yemi Kanu Johnson, the Senior Advocate of Nigeria, who's been speaking with us on this matter. We do hope that something is done, at least to give us the kind of democracy that we hope for. Thank you so much indeed for your time tonight.
Thank you very much.